Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thank you for tuning in and checking out my latest video. Now, this video is going to be talking about boxing legend and one of my favorite fighters of all time, Roberto Hands of Stone Duran. And in this video, I'm going to talk about some of his achievements in the sport of boxing, some memorable fights throughout his career, and where I think he belongs in the history of the sport of boxing, in my opinion. So, with no further ado, I hope everyone enjoys. Roberto Duran was a guy who grew up in Panama in extreme poverty. He was a street kid, and he had to work for everything he achieved in his life. When I look back at the type of fighter Roberto Duran is, he is definitely like a street kid from Panama leading up to his fights. He'll tell his opponents, you're a bitch. He'll call you a piece of shit. That's just the kind of way that Roberto Duran was like when he led up to fights. He was a very intimidating and aggressive type of guy. And when I look back at his career, this is a guy with 104 victories, 16 defeats, and 69 knockouts. And that is an extremely impressive record, along with a lot of other achievements in his career, such as he was 72-1 at one point of his career. He won 4 titles in 4 different weight classes, Boxing Hall of Famer. And when I look at the skills he possesses as a fighter, this is a guy who was a great body puncher, excellent power in both hands. He was a guy with a solid chin, a good heart, underrated defense, could slip and feint as well. So he just really had it all, really, as a fighter that you could ask for. And in my opinion, people don't understand how smart of a fighter Roberto Duran actually is. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. A lot of people think that Duran, because he was an aggressive fighter, was kind of like a come-forward type of brawler, which wasn't the case at all. I look at a Ring Magazine article that Marvin Hagler was recently in, where he was talking about how in his fight with Duran early on, that Hagler would throw his jab and Duran would time his jab and throw a right hand back, and he consistently was hitting Marvin Hagler with that until Hagler figured out what he was doing. That goes to show you the type of smarts that Duran had inside the ring. Now, moving on, guys, I want to talk about some of the fights throughout his career. And let me first start with his rematch with Esteban de Jesus, the Puerto Rican fighter who was a very tough guy. So in the first matchup between him and Duran, he actually dropped Duran and ended up beating Duran in that fight. And he's the first guy who actually has a victory over Roberto Duran. So Duran, of course, wanted to prove that he was the king in the lightweight division, and he did so in this rematch. In the rematch, some notable things that happened was Duran was actually dropped in the first round of his rematch with Esteban de Jesus, but ended up rebounding and dropped de Jesus in the 7th round, I believe, and finished him in the 11th round of this fight. De Jesus could just not take any more of the pressure that Duran was bringing to him, and Duran really broke him down in this fight and really showed who the better fighter was. But de Jesus, credit to him, was one hell of a fighter and a tough guy. Now, the next matchup is arguably the biggest win in Roberto Duran's historic career, and that would be against him and Ray Leonard in Olympic Stadium in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Now, in this fight, a lot of people thought that Ray Leonard would be the big favorite by the fans in this fight because he won his gold medal actually in Montreal. But the Montreal fans actually were more rooting for Roberto Duran in this fight, and he was a fan favorite. Now, when you look back at this fight, there is some really... This fight, to me, is an absolute classic fight. And Mike Tyson, actually, the other day, commented that it may be the greatest fight, in his opinion, that he has ever seen. And really, it is an outstanding fight. These guys just went at each other. They were trying to kill each other that night in the ring, the way they were landing these vicious shots on each other. Some notable highlights from the fight. Duran in the 2nd round of this fight staggers Ray Leonard with a left hook and hurt him. Duran could not knock him down because Ray Leonard is a very tough fighter. Ends up going to decision. Duran rightfully wins a decision in this fight, but Ray Leonard showed his heart in the fight. In the championship rounds, he really had some success against Duran, and he put on a performance that was very good as well, and that's what made it both an outstanding fight. You had 2 boxing legends going toe-to-toe in this fight and giving it all they had. Now, of course, after this fight where Duran defeats Ray Leonard in the welterweight division, there had to be a rematch. And Duran had ballooned up in weight after this fight, which he did it a lot of times throughout his career. And Ray Leonard actually ended up defeating Roberto Duran in the rematch, where Duran said no mas, basically quitting the fight, and everyone turned on Roberto Duran after that fight. You had his trainer, the great Ray Arcel, left him. You had Don King even leaving him. You had people in Panama that he really loved and respected even turned on him. So Duran really had to prove to everybody that he could become a champion again after that fight. And Duran never quit on himself, which was evident when he moved up to 154 pounds to fight for the junior middleweight championship against Davey Moore. Now in this fight, Davey Moore was a huge favorite in this matchup. Roberto Duran had a lot of disadvantages in this fight. Davey Moore was younger than him, the more fresh fighter. It was his more natural weight class, were just some of the things that Duran was up against. And not too many people thought Duran would win at all. But boy, were they ever wrong. And Roberto Duran came out in this fight and just destroyed the much bigger man, beat him down. It was a vicious performance from Roberto Duran. Duran actually dropped him in the 7th round. He went flying across the ring. Davey Moore did, landed on his ass. And Duran in the 8th round just was teeing off on a physically exhausted Davey Moore. Duran had just beaten him down throughout the fight and he couldn't take it anymore. And the referee actually could have stopped that fight a little earlier than he did. And Davey Moore was never the same after that fight. That was just one of these type of fights where just it was crazy the beating Duran put on him. And that is one of his biggest performances of all time, and such a redemption for Roberto Duran as a fighter that fight was. And the last big fight of Roberto Duran's career, his last great performance in my opinion, was against him and Iran the Blade Barkley, which was a fight at middleweight. Now, Iran Barkley had defeated Tommy Hearns in the upset of the year, ended up stopping Tommy Hearns, and Iran Barkley, again, was the favorite in this fight. He was the bigger man. It was his weight division. And Duran came into this fight the underdog. And these two guys put on a classic fight. This was a war. One of my favorite fights to watch when I look back at Roberto Duran's career. In this matchup, Iran Barkley actually hurt Roberto Duran pretty bad in the 8th round. I'm surprised that Duran didn't get knocked down a few times in that round when you look at the puncher really that Iran Barkley was and the shot that he landed on Duran. It goes to show you the heart that Duran had and why he was such a great champion. The 11th round, Roberto Duran lands an outstanding combination that ends up dropping Iran Barkley. And he ends up winning a very close decision against Iran Barkley. Duran had to pull out the late rounds in this fight to win this matchup, and he did so. And if you go back and watch this fight, you see both of these guys landing big left hooks, huge right hands, vicious body work both of these guys did to each other. And this is absolutely a classic fight that you got to watch if you haven't seen it. Outstanding performance for Roberto Duran, winning the middleweight championship in his late 30s. And in my opinion, Roberto Duran is the best lightweight of all time. And in my opinion, he's a top 10 boxer ever in the history of the sport of boxing. He definitely deserves, in my opinion, to be in the top 10 of all time, which is saying something considering the outstanding fighters that have been involved in the sport of boxing. And before I let you guys go, I also wanted to share with you another side that people don't see of Roberto Duran. They see him as this very aggressive, intimidating type of guy. There's a couple of stories I want to share with you guys. One is about him visiting Esteban de Jesus, who had actually contracted AIDS. And at that time, people didn't know if you could get AIDS from touch or not. And there's a historic photo, really, a really cool picture I thought that I'll probably post on the video here, guys, of Roberto Duran hugging and talking to Esteban de Jesus while he's on his deathbed. I thought it was a very classy thing of Roberto Duran to do. And it showed he really had a great heart outside of the ring. Another story I want to speak to you guys about is when Mike Tyson's daughter actually died, her mother and Mike Tyson's daughter actually used to listen to a lot of Spanish music, and one of their favorite bands was actually from Panama. So what happened was Mike Tyson got in contact with some gentleman who put him through to Roberto Duran's family. And Roberto Duran's family actually got this band, who was Mike Tyson's daughter's favorite band, to come out and play at the funeral for his daughter, and they sang. And Mike Tyson talks about in the book how much he owes Roberto Duran, and he really appreciated that gesture very much. And I thought that was another classy thing that Roberto Duran did in his career. And also, Duran gives back to the people of Panama quite a bit, from what I've heard. He's a giving guy, and he knows where he came from. His background was extreme poverty, so I got the utmost respect for Roberto Duran. He was a people's champion, no question about it. And yeah, I really got a lot of respect for him. And 2015, guys, the Hands of Stone movie is coming out. I know Robert De Niro is playing Ray Arcel in the movie. I know Usher is playing Sugar Ray Leonard. So you guys should check that movie out. Hopefully it's good. It better be good for a legend like Roberto Duran. And I hope you guys enjoyed my my story on Roberto Duran's legacy. And let me know what you guys think, your favorite Duran memories, favorite fights, etc., guys. And thank you once again for tuning into the video. Sorry I kept you guys for a while there today.